What's going on, everybody? This is Dean with East Coast Overland Adventures. So we're going to answer one of the most frequently asked questions we get, and that is, how do you select a vehicle for overland travel? One of the very first things to consider when selecting a vehicle for overland travel is the destination. Where are you going? There's a couple reasons for this. Starters, there's some variables when you go to ship a vehicle internationally, or if you're traveling in a particular country, you need to understand kind of what the laws are for that particular area you're traveling in. And you might be in an area where you can't have a lifted vehicle over a certain size, or you might have some weight restrictions to worry about. Also, the second thing we're going to talk about is dealer network, and this is kind of twofold. One, it's supporting the vehicle. The other part is supporting any of the aftermarket modifications you've made to that vehicle. So if you're going to be traveling internationally, you want to make sure you're selecting a vehicle platform that is going to be supported where you're going. You don't want to just pick a vehicle that's great in your backyard where you have a dealer right down the road if you're going to be 5,000 miles away on a completely different continent. There's a reason why vehicles like Toyotas, Land Rovers, Mercedes, and Jeeps are very popular with international travelers, because those platforms are supported all around the world. The other thing you got to remember too is, here in North America, we have a multi-billion-dollar industry that supports aftermarket modifications. In the rest of the world, and a lot of countries on other continents, don't have that kind of industry. So when you're selecting a vehicle, whether or not you need to make modifications to it, one of the things you may want to consider is whether or not those modifications are going to be able to be supported. So you want to look at how easy that vehicle is to be repaired. And that brings me to the next thing, and that is dependability. How reliable is that vehicle going to be? How easy is that vehicle to be repaired? And again, backing up one, is there a dealer network that supports getting the spare parts and any other repairs that that vehicle may need while you are traveling? One of the next things to consider is, what is the distance that you're traveling? How long of a trip are you going on? Is it going to be a couple hundred miles, a couple thousand miles, or does your trip not have any end and you're just going to be traveling ad infinitum, just driving and driving and driving until the wheels fall off? Parallel to that is the duration of the trip. How long are you going to be traveling? Are you going out for a weekend? Are you going out for a week? Are you going out for a month? Are you going out for a year or even longer? Again, are you going to be traveling ad infinitum? Because there's a lot of things that you can tolerate for a couple days at a time, but then there are some things that after a couple weeks or couple months, you are definitely not going to be able to tolerate. So again, the distance and duration is also going to be very important when you are selecting a vehicle for overland travel. One of the other things to consider is, what is the difficulty of the terrain that you're going to be traveling? Are you going to be traveling in a developed area that has nice groomed roads, whether they're paved or unpaved? Or are you going to be venturing off into more unimproved terrain where you might be on a trail and you might be requiring something more technical? Four-wheel drive, low range, lockers, those sorts of things. So the difficulty of the terrain is definitely going to impact your vehicle selection. One of the other things that you need to consider is, what are the duties that this vehicle is going to have to fulfill? Is it going to be a dedicated adventure vehicle, or is it also going to have to be your daily driver? Is it something you're going to have to drive back and forth to work? Is it something you're going to have to take the kids to school in? Is it something you're going to have to take the dog to the vet in? Are you going to have to pick up groceries in it? Are you going to have to do household chores with it? Or is it strictly, again, just a dedicated overland adventure vehicle? Also, is it a vehicle that you're going to have to not only recreate out of, but are you going to have to live out of it? And are you possibly going to have to work out of it? These duties are going to impact the type of vehicle that you select for overland travel. The last one we're going to cover is dedication. This might seem like a little bit weird, but how dedicated are you to that vehicle? For instance, you're gonna pry this one out of my cold, dead hands. I am very dedicated to this vehicle. It's something that I've spent a lot of time and effort into building. There are other people who will switch vehicles every couple months or every couple years. There's also people who aren't dedicated to the vehicle at all, and they are solely focused on the experience of travel, and they will do things like fly into a country and rent a vehicle they have no emotional connection to whatsoever. So again, all of these different variables start adding up, and if you're not that dedicated to the vehicle, well, consider maybe a fly and rent option. So Some of the other variables to consider are internal living space. Again, if you're traveling for a couple days or a couple weeks at a time, interior living space is usually not a high priority. You probably already have a brick and mortar home or apartment that you're living in, and you're traveling more on a recreational level. But if you're gonna be traveling for a long time, a couple months, a couple years, that interior living space becomes very, very important. And that's why you see a lot of people traveling in things like vans and larger vehicles, because they value that interior living space above all else. Now, along those lines, another thing to consider is the weight of the vehicle, the GVRW, the gross vehicle rated weight. When you start adding modifications and you start carrying food and extra fuel and water and all that extra gear, all of that weight adds up. In the backpacking world, ounces become pounds. In the overland world, pounds become tons, and you can end up with a vehicle that is grossly overweight relatively easily. So one of the things you want to make sure of when you go to select your vehicle is, when you think about all of the different gear and the length of your trip and the difficulty of the terrain, how much is that vehicle going to weigh, and do you actually have a vehicle platform that can support all of that weight? And one of the last things to consider is whether or not the vehicle is going to require international shipping. There are laws and regulations regarding what can actually fit into a container and how that vehicle is going to be prepared, transported, and received internationally. There are some options where you can put a vehicle in a container. There are other options known as roll-on, roll-off. But when you're selecting a vehicle for overland travel and you want to travel internationally and you're dedicated to that vehicle and it's something that you want to take from one continent to another, make sure you look into those regulations, look into those laws, and make sure that that vehicle that you've built, that you've bought, that you've put all of your time and effort into is going to be able to make that cross-ocean trip. Hopefully you found this video informative. I myself am going to jump in my vehicle right here, hit the trails, and I hope to see you out there.